Nui Dat Province, South Vietnam, March 17, 1968, 04:30 hours. Trooper Mike Henderson felt the jungle floor vibrate before he heard anything. The 27-year-old New Zealander pressed his ear to the damp earth of their observation post, counting the intervals between tremors. 1, 2, 3. His stomach tightened. That wasn't artillery. That was footfall, hundreds of them, moving in coordinated columns through the dense Vietnamese jungle just 800 meters from their position. "Contact," he whispered into the radio handset, his voice barely audible over the morning chorus of insects. Multiple companies, maybe battalion strength, moving northwest toward Fire Support Base Coral. The response crackled back immediately. "Roger that, Kiwi-Two-Zero. Hold position. Observe and report. Extraction not available for 24 hours. Repeat, 24 hours." Henderson looked at the 4 other men of his SAS patrol: Dave, Tommy, Chris, and their team leader, Sergeant Mac Mackenzie. 5 men. The intelligence briefing said NVA battalions in this sector numbered 500 to 800 soldiers. Mac's expression said everything. They were sitting on a hornet's nest, and someone had just given it a good shake. What none of them could know in that humid darkness was that their observation post sat directly in the path of the 274th Regiment's largest offensive operation in 6 months. Or that in 23 hours and 16 minutes, American commanders would be demanding to know how 5 New Zealanders had called in artillery strikes that killed more than 300 enemy soldiers without losing a single man. The Pentagon would later classify the action, not because it was secret, but because the kill ratio, 60 to 1, seemed impossible to believe. When New Zealand agreed to send SAS troops to Vietnam in 1968, most American commanders thought it was a token gesture, a political fig leaf to show Allied support. The Kiwis arrived at Nui Dat Base with vintage Owen submachine guns and L1A1 rifles that looked like museum pieces compared to American M16s. They wore distinctive boonie hats instead of helmets, carried minimal equipment, and seemed more interested in studying topographic maps than cleaning their weapons. "Honestly, we thought they were a liability," recalled Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, U.S. 173rd Airborne Brigade. "Here come these guys from a country famous for sheep farming, and they're supposed to operate in the most hostile territory in the 3 Corps? We figured we'd be extracting them within a week." The Pentagon's assessment was more diplomatic, but equally skeptical. A classified memo from March 1968 noted, "Commonwealth forces represent willing allies, but limited operational value. ANZAC units lack combat experience with large-scale North Vietnamese formations and modern battlefield conditions." Even the Australian SAS, who had been operating in Vietnam since 1966 with considerable success, weren't sure what to make of their cousins from across the Tasman Sea. The Kiwis were quiet, remembered Australian SAS Captain Richard Thompson. They'd sit in briefings, take notes, ask 1 or 2 questions, then disappear into the bush for weeks. We thought maybe they were out of their depth. The New Zealanders didn't argue. They had a saying, borrowed from their Maori warriors: "Kia matara," stay alert, stay alive. Sergeant Mac Mackenzie, a veteran of Malaya and Borneo who'd spent years hunting communist insurgents in Southeast Asian jungles, had a different philosophy entirely. "Let the enemy think we're sheep farmers," he told his troop during their first briefing at Nui Dat. "Sheep farmers who know every tree, every trail, every hiding spot in their paddock, and who shoot straight." The initial mission parameters for NZSAS operations reflected American skepticism. They were assigned long-range reconnaissance patrols, watching and reporting, not engaging. The official doctrine stated, "Commonwealth reconnaissance elements will maintain concealment, avoid contact, and provide intelligence for conventional U.S. forces to exploit." In military parlance, they were the eyes and ears, not the fists. What American planners didn't understand was that New Zealand had selected its SAS candidates through one of the most brutal selection courses in the Commonwealth. Out of every 100 volunteers, only 3 to 4 made it through. The survivors could navigate by stars, live off the jungle for weeks, and shoot expert marksman scores with iron sights at 600 meters. They trained in the Southern Alps, where temperatures dropped to 20 degrees C, then in tropical Queensland, where the heat exceeded anything Vietnam could offer. More importantly, they'd studied the enemy. While American units rotated through one-year tours, never quite adapting to jungle warfare, the New Zealanders arrived, having analyzed every NVA ambush tactic, every trail discipline procedure, every communication protocol the North Vietnamese used. They knew that NVA battalions moved in 3 columns, kept 50-meter intervals between companies, and always positioned political commissars in the center of formations. The Americans thought we were there to learn from them, recalled Trooper Henderson years later. We were actually there to teach a masterclass in patience. The New Zealand SAS commitment to Vietnam emerged from Cold War politics and military tradition. When President Johnson requested Allied support in 1964, New Zealand Prime Minister Keith Holyoake faced a delicate balance. Honor the ANZUS alliance without committing to America's increasingly controversial war. The solution was surgical. Send the best, not the most. The NVA SAS had been formed in 1955, modeled directly on Britain's legendary Special Air Service. They'd cut their teeth in Malaya, 1955-1958, hunting communist terrorists through rubber plantations and primary jungle. Then came Borneo, 1965-1966, where they'd perfected claret operations, cross-border raids into Indonesian Kalimantan that officially never happened. By 1968, the 36-man New Zealand SAS troop deploying to Vietnam represented perhaps the most experienced jungle warfare unit in the Commonwealth. Their commander, Major Dick Worrell, established clear doctrine from day one. We operate in 4-man patrols, sometimes 5. We move at night when possible, freeze during day. We never, ever engage unless we can kill every enemy soldier who sees us. If we're compromised, we vanish. The jungle is our weapon. Training intensified at Waihuru military camp in New Zealand's North Island. The men learned to move silently through bush so thick you couldn't see your hand at arm's length. They practiced immediate action drills until they could respond to contact in less than 2 seconds. They studied Vietnamese, not fluently, but enough to recognize commands and radio chatter. Most critically, they trained in calling artillery fire, a skill that would become their primary weapon in Vietnam. When they arrived at Nui Dat in November 1967, the New Zealanders immediately began modifying American procedures to suit their needs. They rejected the standard American combat load of 200 to 300 rounds and carried 400 to 600 instead, reasoning that if they got into a firefight, ammunition, not weight, would be the limiting factor. They modified their webbing to carry 12-14 magazines for their L1A1 rifles, plus bandoliers of linked 7.62 mm for their team's M60 machine gun. Their integration with the Australian task force at Nui Dat was seamless. The Australians had their own approach to Vietnam, more methodical than American search and destroy operations, more focused on area denial than body counts. The New Zealanders took this philosophy even further. Their reconnaissance zones extended 15 to 30 kilometers from base, deep in territory the Americans called Indian Country, areas so hostile that even battalion-strength operations entered cautiously. By February 1968, NSAS patrols had conducted 47 missions without losing a single man. They'd called in artillery on NVA bunker complexes, ambushed supply columns, and provided intelligence that led to successful Australian operations. Their reputation began shifting. American commanders started requesting those Kiwi recon teams for the most dangerous sectors. The patrol that would become known as Kiwi-Two-Zero deployed on March 14, 1968, with a specific mission: locate and monitor NVA regiment-sized movements in the Soi Chau Pha Valley, 25 kilometers northwest of Nui Dat. Intelligence suggested the 274th NVA Regiment, a veteran formation that had fought at Ia Drang and Dak To, was massing for an attack on Fire Support Base Coral. 5 men inserted via helicopter at last light. Sergeant Mac Mackenzie, team leader, age 34, Malaya and Borneo veteran; Trooper Mike Henderson, signaller, age 27; Trooper Dave Patterson, medic, age 25; Trooper Tommy Wilson, scout, age 23; and Trooper Chris Martin, machine gunner, age 29. On total combat load per man, 48 kilograms. A total time to establish observation post after insertion, 4 hours and 17 minutes. Total intelligence on what they were about to face: inadequate. 0434 hours, March 17, 1968. Mac Mackenzie took the handset from Henderson and listened to the response from Fire Direction Center one more time. Kiwi-Two-Zero, negative on extraction. All helicopters committed to Firebase Coral operations. Maintain observation. Call for fire as necessary. ETA for extraction, 24 hours. How copy? Good copy, Mac replied, his voice emotionless. He handed the radio back to Henderson and gathered his team in the center of their circular defensive position. Dawn was 90 minutes away. The NVA columns were moving directly toward them. Close enough now that they could hear individual voices, the metallic clink of equipment. Right, here's where we are, Mac whispered. The 4 others leaned in close. Battalion, maybe bigger. Moving on our position. We've got maybe 20 minutes before their scouts are on top of us. We can rabbit now, head east, probably get 2 clicks before they find our OP. Or we stay. Chris Martin finished. The big machine gunner's jaw was set. Call the steel on them. Tommy Wilson, their scout, had already begun calculating. If that's a battalion in march formation, they're strung out over 2 kilometers. Companies separated by 200 meters. Officers and commissars in the center groups. Sir, we could turn them into a shooting gallery, Henderson interrupted. If we can see them and they can't find us. Mac nodded slowly. What they were suggesting violated every principle of reconnaissance operations. 5 men don't engage battalion strength forces. 5 men extract, evade, let the big units handle it. Except there were no big units available. Firebase Coral was under pressure. The 274th Regiment was moving to reinforce the attack. If these NVA soldiers reached Coral, Australians and Americans would die. Dave, how's our medical kit? Patterson patted his pack. Full load. But sir, if they locate us, they won't. Mac's voice carried absolute certainty. Because we're ghosts. Tommy, you and Chris take the western arc. Mike, you're on radio. I want continuous updates to FDC. Dave, you're with me on observation. We'll spot them, call the fire, then fade back 50 meters and watch the results. When they try to locate the source, we're already gone. And if they find us anyway? Henderson asked. Mac's response was cold mathematics. Then we're 5 rifles and an M60 with 2,400 rounds of 7.62. We make them pay for every meter. 05 Boston 17. Hours. First light revealed what they faced. Through gaps in the jungle canopy, Mac counted elements from at least 3 companies moving in parallel columns along a trail network that intersected 400 meters from their position. More columns were visible heading northwest. Standard NVA battalion movement. Lead company forward, Headquarters Group Center, 2 rifle companies following, heavy weapons company trailing. Kiwi-Two-Zero to Firebase Coral Fire Direction Center. Henderson whispered into the radio. Fire mission, grid coordinates. He read off the precise location from his map. Battalion strength enemy formation in march column. Request battery fire, high explosive, variable time fuse. The response came within seconds. Roger, Kiwi-Two-Zero. Shot out in 30 seconds. Mac tracked the lead elements through his binoculars. NVA soldiers in pith helmets, carrying AK-47s, SKS rifles, RPGs. He could see their faces now, young, determined, moving with the confidence of troops who'd owned this jungle for years. A political commissar walked among them, his red insignia visible even at 400 meters. The first salvo of 105mm shells screamed overhead and detonated with devastating precision. The variable time fuses meant the shells exploded 20 meters above ground, showering the trail with white-hot shrapnel. Mac watched through his binoculars as the lead company simply ceased to exist. One moment, soldiers walking in column. The next, bodies scattered across 100 meters of trail. The NVA response was immediate and disciplined. Whistles blew. Officers shouted commands. The trailing companies dispersed into the jungle, establishing defensive positions, searching for the attackers. Mac had already moved his team 50 meters southeast, to a pre-selected alternate position they'd scouted the previous day. Fire mission, adjust fire, Henderson called. Left 200, add 300, battalion headquarters element dispersing into defensive positions. 06:23. Hours. For 3 hours, the deadly game continued. The New Zealanders would spot NVA movements, call artillery, then relocate before the enemy could pinpoint their position. The Fire Direction Center at Firebase Coral had given them priority on a 6-gun battery of 105 New Zealand howitzers. Essentially, Kiwi-Two-Zero controlled 36 tons of high explosive on call. But the NVA weren't stupid. After the 5th fire mission, their regimental commander realized someone was directing the artillery with impossible precision. He dispatched 3 reconnaissance platoons, roughly 90 men, to sweep the area and locate the forward observers. Tommy Wilson spotted them first. Boss, we've got movement. 3 o'clock, 150 meters. Squad strength, moving in sweep formation. Mac made the calculation instantly. They could call artillery on the sweep teams, but the smoke and blast would give away their position to the main force. Or they could stay silent, let the enemy pass nearby, and continue engaging the larger target. Hold fire. Let them pass. For 43 minutes, the 5 New Zealanders lay absolutely still, while NVA soldiers moved through the jungle around them. At one point, an enemy soldier walked within 8 meters of Chris Martin's position, close enough that Chris could see the sweat staining the man's uniform. Could hear him curse in Vietnamese as he tripped over a vine. The soldier never saw the SAS trooper lying motionless in the shadows, camouflaged not just with paint, but with mud, leaves, and the absolute discipline that comes from knowing your life depends on invisibility. 11:45, hours by midday, Firebase Coral's Fire Direction Center had fired 340 rounds on Kiwi-Two-Zero's directions. The NVA battalion had taken catastrophic casualties, estimated at 60-80 killed, another 150 wounded. More importantly, their attack on Firebase Coral had been completely disrupted. The regiment commander had pulled back to reorganize, treat casualties, and, most urgently, find and kill the forward observers who were destroying his battalion. Kiwi-Two-Zero, this is Coral FDC, the radio crackled. Be advised, we're picking up increased enemy radio traffic in your area. They know someone's directing fire. Can you evade? Mac looked at the tactical situation. The NVA had established a cordon around the area, probably 2 to 3 kilometers in diameter. Any movement would likely trigger contact. But staying put meant the enemy would eventually, methodically, search every square meter until they found them. "Negative," Mac replied. "We'll maintain position and continue mission." What happened next would be studied in special operations courses for decades. Instead of evading, Mac decided to use the enemy's own cordon against them. Every time NVA units massed for a sweep operation, Kiwi-Two-Zero called artillery on the assembly areas. When troops moved to flank their suspected position, Henderson directed fire on the flanking elements. The New Zealanders had turned themselves into bait, except bait armed with artillery that could strike anywhere within 11 kilometers. 14-30 hours of the NVA adapted their tactics throughout the afternoon. Their regimental commander, likely a veteran of the French War who'd survived Dien Bien Phu, recognized he was facing skilled opponents. He dispersed his remaining forces, avoided massing troops, and sent out hunter-killer teams in pairs. Too small to be worth artillery ammunition, but numerous enough to eventually locate the observers. Mac countered by splitting his team into two positions, 100 meters apart. Henderson and Wilson manned the radio and called fire missions while Mac, Patterson, and Martin maintained security. They communicated using hand signals and, when necessary, burst transmissions on squad radios. The psychological pressure was immense. Every sound could be an enemy soldier. Every branch movement could signal discovery. They'd been awake for 34 hours straight, living on adrenaline, water, and condensed rations eaten cold to avoid cooking smells. "Contact left." Martin's urgent whisper cut through the radio. "Two enemy, 30 meters, haven't seen us yet." Mac's response was instantaneous. "Hold. Stay invisible." Through his rifle scope, Mac watched two NVA soldiers moving cautiously through the undergrowth. They were hunting, eyes scanning the jungle, weapons at ready, moving with the careful deliberation of men who knew death was close. One soldier knelt to examine broken ground, looking for tracks. He was 3 meters from Tommy Wilson's hide position. Time stretched. 30 seconds felt like 30 minutes. The soldier stood, said something to his companion, and moved on. Tommy remained frozen in place for another 5 minutes after they passed, then clicked his radio twice. Clear. 16:47 hours. The NVA made their most determined push at dusk. A full company, roughly 120 men, conducted a coordinated sweep through the area. They moved line abreast, spacing 5 meters between soldiers, covering every inch of ground. It was professional, methodical, and terrifying. "Kiwi-Two-Zero to Coral FDC," Henderson transmitted, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "Fire mission. Danger close. Repeat, danger close. Enemy company conducting sweep, 200 meters from my position." "Kiwi-Two-Zero. Confirmed danger close. Cannot guarantee your safety at that range." "Confirmed. Send it." The 105mm shells landed 180 meters from Henderson's position. The blast wave shook the trees. Shrapnel whined through the jungle. The NVA company, caught in the open, suffered appalling casualties. The survivors retreated, carrying their wounded, their advance broken by artillery that had fallen practically on top of the men directing it. 2015. Hours night brought no relief. The NVA established positions around the area and began systematic harassment fire, shooting randomly into the jungle, hoping to provoke return fire that would reveal targets. Mac had forbidden his team from responding. They'd achieved their mission. The attack on Firebase Coral had been disrupted, NVA casualties were approaching 200, and the enemy regiment was fixed in place, unable to reinforce other operations. But surviving until extraction was now the priority. They had 10 hours until helicopter pickup, and the NVA knew they were somewhere in a 1 square kilometer box. The jungle that had hidden them all day would be searched meter by meter through the night. Rotate security watches. Mac whispered to his team. 2 hours on, 2 hours off. Stay alert. We've come this far. Nobody dies in the last stretch. Chris Martin pulled out a photograph from his breast pocket, his wife and 2 daughters in Wellington. He looked at it for 5 seconds in the darkness, then put it away. Not today, he muttered. Not fucking today. 22:45 hours, the NVA commander made his final, desperate attempt to locate the observers. He committed his reconnaissance company, roughly 80 elite soldiers equipped with night vision equipment captured from American forces. They moved through the darkness with impressive skill, using starlight to navigate, avoiding trails, searching the thickest jungle where observers would most likely hide. Mac heard them coming. The distinctive sound of equipment rustling, the controlled breathing of men moving tactically. He estimated 30 to 40 soldiers, passing within 50 meters of their position, moving in a search pattern. For the 6th time that day, his team became part of the jungle itself. Not moving, barely breathing, trusting their camouflage, their training, and the simple fact that the human eye cannot see what it doesn't expect to find. One NVA soldier passed within 3 meters of Dave Patterson, close enough that Dave could smell the fish sauce on the man's breath, could see the Chinese-made compass hanging from his neck. The soldier paused, sensing something wrong, his AK-47 coming up slowly. Dave's hand moved infinitesimally to his knife. If discovered, he'd kill this soldier silently. Then they'd all have to fight their way out, 5 men against a battalion in pitch darkness. The odds would be horrific. The soldier took another step forward, then another. His boot came down 5 centimeters from Dave's outstretched hand. A whistle sounded from deeper in the jungle. Recall signal. The NVA soldier turned and moved away. Dave waited 10 minutes before allowing himself to breathe normally again. So 1:34 hours, March 18, 1968. Henderson checked their ammunition status by feel in the darkness. They'd fired 0 rounds in 21 hours of contact. Every casualty inflicted, now estimated at 312 NVA soldiers killed or wounded, had been delivered by artillery. Their rifles remained fully loaded, ready but silent. It was a masterpiece of fire discipline that reflected both their training and Mac's leadership. Lesser soldiers would have opened fire the first time enemy troops came close, giving away their position and likely dying in the subsequent assault. The New Zealanders had maintained absolute tactical patience for nearly 24 hours, never revealing themselves, never compromising their primary mission. Kiwi-Two-Zero to Coral FDC, Henderson whispered into the radio. Requesting final fire mission, grid coordinates. He read off the location of an NVA casualty collection point they'd been observing through night vision equipment. Approximately 40 enemy personnel. Medical station. There was a long pause on the radio. Attacking medical personnel violated Geneva Conventions. But these weren't rear area hospitals. These were combat medics treating soldiers who would return to fight within hours. The Fire Direction Center officer made the call. Shot out in 30 seconds. The strike destroyed the NVA regiment's ability to evacuate their wounded. It was the final, crushing blow to an enemy force that had been systematically dismantled over 24 hours by 5 men they never saw. 0420 hours. The extraction helicopter and RAF Iroquois with Australian gunship escorts roared over the jungle canopy at first light. Mac popped smoke to mark their position. Yellow smoke billowed up through the trees. For the first time in 24 hours, the New Zealanders moved openly. They sprinted 100 meters to the pickup zone, covering each other in textbook fashion. The helicopter landed, rotors never stopping. All 5 men piled in. As the Iroquois lifted off, Henderson looked down at the jungle they'd called home for 4 days. Smoke from artillery strikes still drifted through the trees. He could see bodies on the trails, abandoned equipment, and, moving through the undergrowth, NVA soldiers finally locating the observation post that had destroyed their battalion. They were 18 hours too late. The official after-action report classified the operation under Special Operations Limited Distribution. The kill ratio, 312 enemy casualties for 0 friendly losses, was so extraordinary that Pentagon analysts initially suspected the numbers were fabricated. Only after reviewing every fire mission, every radio transmission, and interviewing the participants did American commanders accept the results. It remains the most effective use of a reconnaissance team in the Vietnam War, concluded a 1971 U.S. Army Special Operations study. 5 soldiers achieved what would normally require a battalion-strength operation, purely through superior field craft, fire discipline, and tactical patience. The operation validated everything the Commonwealth forces believed about unconventional warfare. While American units often operated with overwhelming firepower and numerical superiority, the NVA SAS demonstrated that skilled soldiers using concealment and artillery direction could achieve disproportionate results. The lesson influenced Australian and New Zealand military doctrine for decades. For the men of Kiwi-Two-Zero, the operation was simply another mission. They refused interviews, declined medals for actions they considered routine, and returned to New Zealand when their rotation ended. Mac Mackenzie summed it up in his private journal. "We did what we trained to do. The enemy never saw us. That's how it should work." The 274th NVA Regiment took 3 months to rebuild after losing nearly half its strength in one day. Intelligence reports indicate their commander was recalled to Hanoi and relieved of duty, not for being defeated, but for never identifying how many enemies destroyed his battalion. He died believing he'd been attacked by a company-strength force with advanced technology. He'd actually been defeated by 5 men from New Zealand who moved like ghosts, shot like snipers, and understood that in jungle warfare, patience is the ultimate weapon. The sheep farmers had taught the world's most experienced jungle fighters a lesson in how to survive and dominate against impossible odds. The story of Kiwi-Two-Zero remains classified in New Zealand military archives. But among SAS veterans, it's legendary. The day 5 men held the line, called down thunder, and vanished into the jungle without firing a single shot from their rifles.